Head over to KFAN.com, make the keyword contest to enter for a chance to win a Papa Murphy's family meal deal, including a family-sized pepperoni pizza, cookie dough, and classic cheesy bread. KFAN.com, keyword contest to enter.
Over the years I've been doing this program, we intermittently, when we're talking hockey, can bring up the Minnesota North Stars and at any point. And I will get a barrage of, back in the day, messages, emails, these days texts, from people saying that they've never forgotten the team leaving, they've never gotten over the team leaving, that they've never been able to emotionally connect to the current hockey team the same way, and they don't mean that as any sort of affront to that team. Now, realistically, that's probably fewer and fewer people because more and more years are going by since the North Stars fled south. But there is there's something ritualistic and fatalistic when a franchise, no matter the sport, but certainly hockey in the state of hockey, leaves. Up and leaves. And to all that, we've got a new documentary out via Fox 9. Our next guest, front and center on it, Sean Skinner, kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. What is your official, I don't know anybody who has cards anymore. If you have a business card, what does it say on it? I mean, what's your official title with Fox 9?
That's a great question. Steve Lombardozzi, I think, is what it is. It's the utility infielder.
That's all right.
Official title is assistant photo chief, but I'm also one of the executive producers for local programming.
Oh, that's nice. That's
and lead of the Doc 9 department here, which is like a department of like 2 people. But that's pretty much it. It's usually behind the camera and helping create things that we're putting on the air that's not necessarily the daily news.
Before we get to sort of the history here of going down this road, let's cut to the chase early. To people who think they know this, who are old enough to think they know this story, what might surprise them? What, as you went back and looked and talked to people exhaustively to put this thing together, what surprised you that might well surprise some people who think they know everything about the North Stars leaving town?
That's a good question. I think the interaction between Norm and the city of Bloomington was kind of an eye-opener for me, and the fact that, they were forced to trying to move the team downtown Minneapolis to Target Center, but he actually had multiple interactions with the city of Bloomington, and every time he went to the city, they said, great, draw us up what you're thinking, bring us back some plans, and then he would basically ghost them for about 6 months, and then he'd come back to the city of Bloomington and say, we want to stay here, we want to work with you, what can you do? And they say, great, draw us up some plans and get back to us and we can work together. The fact that just felt insincere and just wasn't like, it just felt like he wasn't serious about it. Because who knows? I mean, we didn't get exactly like the light bulb moment when this is exactly when he's going to take it. Cause there was these overlapping discussions he was having with downtown, when Dallas and Bloomington and all these things were happening kind of at the same time, but only certain people knew in certain circles.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And how much, because I haven't seen it yet. So, and I'm looking forward to it, and we'll get into when it's available and the ways that people can watch it. How deep, because one of the theories, certainly at the time, was that Norm was kind of playing a double game, that he was pretending to be exasperated by what he thought was the lack of cooperation locally, but that as these allegations started surfacing out of his office, that at some point he wanted to get the hell out of Dodge. So do you guys explore that? What conclusions, if any, do you come to, or do you think the documentary comes to regarding that issue?
We definitely do, and we wanted to be as fair as possible and cover all of the angles. Obviously there's the financial part of this where he claims, not poverty, but he claims like no not enough fan support, and he was trying all these new things, and they weren't like really sticking to the wall. So he was trying all of these different things. We got a hold of the depositions of the suits that were happening, and dug into those. We spoke with some of the people that were involved, but we decided to stay very respectful. They didn't want to go on camera and talk to us about it. But we did touch the topic. I mean, it's an important part of this. And it just, the timing of when those things started to happen, as well as the the year after the Stanley Cup run, I think Norm thought that would be much more lucrative having a team in the finals than it probably was the following year. But then all of the other things started happening and started coming out.
Sean Skinner, Fox 9, new documentary on the North Stars that I think premiered last night on Fox 9 Plus, correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it airs, the encore is tonight, 11:30. I know it's a little late, on Fox 9.
Excellent.
But it's currently available. So there's a YouTube channel for Fox 9, and then our Fox local app is our streaming app.
Yep.
And it's in that with all of the other Doc 9 documentaries we've done.
So it's the point is, even though it's late tonight, and obviously you could DVR it, but there are other ways to get to it as well. And as I'm sure a lot of people are. Part of this is getting the word out and it dawning on them, because it may not be something that people are necessarily expecting at this particular moment, one could say. So why did you decide? Like you said, you got a wide, you got the opportunity to investigate lots of stuff or go back on lots of stories. That's part of the beauty of this position. Why North Stars? Why now?
It's really interesting. My co-producer, Joe Augustine, he's not from Minnesota. He's from Iowa. And he came in with this pitch of, how does the state of hockey lose its team, right? He's like, I know it's been 31 years, so news tends to like to do these things on like round number years, right? Like of the 30th anniversary or the 40th anniversary. So this is 31 years since the team left, and I gave him a little nudge, and I said, well, it's the 30th year of the Met Center being imploded, if you need a hook. But he was really intrigued by the fact that it was, it's been 30 years, and this state of hockey, this place where hockey seems to have been partially born, south of Canada, lost its pro team. And like, how does that happen? And he pitched it to me, a guy who grew up in the 70s and 80s playing hockey with his dad and his brothers. My grandfather was the lead electrician at the Met Center back in the day. And we talked to a whole mess of people who were former employees of the team, former players. Obviously, we got Louis, and a lot of people who, had a really, really close connection to this. And they felt like they were proud to be a part of it, because there really hadn't been an oral history of this story up to this point.
I'm glad you brought up your own, how personal it is for you, because I think an important part of what you guys try to put together is you look back on how it happened, why it happened. But also, I think you tried to get into the emotional loss that folks associate with losing a franchise, right? That's a big tentacle in this doc, is it not?
I think, going into it, we thought the Norm sucks part of this was going to be the thread. And it's really a small factor. What you find as you watch this piece, whether you were here or not, if you're a transplant from somewhere else, or if you're just a sports fan, is that it's emotional for the community. It's emotional for the people that lived it, but it's also emotional for all the fans. Every person we talked to had, a sense of some sort of emotion to how they felt about different parts of the story. We're getting feedback now from people who are just like, thank you for putting this out. This is a story that needed to be told. I've only told my grandkids about this team. But then we're getting feedback from people in Texas who are just saying, your sad, insufferable fan base who just is refusing to accept the fact that you neglected your team. Like, it's emotional for everybody that I think is watching this, who either felt the team leave or even gained the team and got a Stanley Cup, just a few years later.
How close did you guys get to convincing Norm Green to be a part of this?
I'd like to think we got close, but I don't think we had a chance at any point. We the whole time we had feelers out and requests out. We went through Dallas, we went through the Stars, we went through the NHL. He's in Calgary. He's 91. He's still alive. He's not a person who's very well known digitally. He's not online a lot. There's not a lot of foundations to track him down. So we did our absolute best to get Norm, and we were willing. Dan, we were willing to
go to him, right?
Drive over to Idaho and then straight up into Canada and into Alberta and meet with him and let him kind of tell his side.
Yeah, and that's when you're doing this kind of documentary, that's what you got to be prepared to do. I was rooting for you. I thought, well, maybe enough time has passed by, but my gut told me he's left it so far behind, and he feels like he was so wronged, or he feels like there's so much enmity still that he'd say there's no upside for me at this point to reopen that door. It would have been obviously an amazing coup to get him. Emotionally, how attached were you? What do you remember? You mentioned your granddad. How did he take it at the time?
Well, so he was right on the back end. He was about to retire, and this was kind of the catalyst to get him to just be like, all right, it's time. He wasn't very vocal about these things. He was old school. He kind of internalized a lot of this stuff. But I know, so his two sons, my dad and his brothers, they also used to work at the Met. They'd work like the spotlights for Ice-Capades, and they do things at North Star games. And boy, they have some fire in them about everything that happened. Yeah. Probably not anything I could say on broadcast radio, but again, it goes back to that emotional part. Like, this was a part of our state, our market. Hockey's a passionate sport. It's active. It's hard hitting.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people just, man, even when the building came down, there's just so many stories of people crying and taking pictures and just being there and wanting to witness that.
Is it, I know I'm going to talk to Louis about it next week, because I did forget that it was coming out this week when we had him on yesterday. And Louis always been pretty adamant in his belief that, I don't know that I'd classify him as a Norm Green apologist, because I think he gets some of the enmity, but I think looking back, his story has basically been, well, the sports commission and in the end, kind of forced Norm's hand more than people here want to accept. Is that what he says in the doc? And what other commentary do you get regarding that particular opinion?
Louis was very vocal. He was adamant that the sports commission was obstructionist, and they got in the way, or they weren't willing to help the team as much as he believes they should have. And in return, they say that it was more beneficial to have that team living in downtown Minneapolis than in Bloomington. So there are all these circles of, these entities that we'll keep it, but we got to put it here. It's just not viable at the Met Center. It needs too much upkeep. It needs all the renovations. And it was $15 million that they were trying to get. And Bill Lesser from the Sports Commission even says, they could have gotten the $15 million, and it might have been a short-term, solution, but they were still wanting that team to share the Target Center with the Timberwolves.
And what's interesting about that now is that I think the thinking in when it comes to sports franchises has changed completely, and no one even expects that anymore. And maybe it was unrealistic then, but sure as hell is now, right? Nobody's sharing anything. Nobody is willing to share at this point, right? They're all on their own.
Right, and I think Norm wanted his own building. Really, he wanted to own, because the Sports Commission owns the Met Center and the property. So Norm wanted his own facility, and to be, to gain all the revenue from the suites and seats from that.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. Let's remind folks they can get it via Fox 9 local. It'll be on Fox 9, probably replace, because we're on Enough Said, we're off Fox 9 tonight. So that's probably you taking our spot, but I think that's only fair because it should get some attention on not just Fox 9 Plus, but Fox 9. It's called No Stars When Minnesota Lost Pro Hockey. And you said it's also available via the YouTube channel. Is that correct?
Yeah, Fox 9 YouTube channel. It's up right now.
Outstanding work. We appreciate the time, and I hope it goes well. I know it went well. I hope you get to continue to get good feedback.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you helping us be a part of this documentary, too.
Glad to do it. That is Sean Skinner, Fox 9, kind of bon vivant. He mentioned it. He's got about 10 different jobs. And I don't even think you have to be old enough to remember the North Stars. It happened here. If you care about sports history, it's a really interesting chapter. And it's the first effort, I think, in a long time to try to go back this many, 31 years later, and kind of put it together and get back to the people who were there at the time. The debate will continue on who do you want to blame. But I think in some ways maybe it's good that it wasn't just turned into another Norm sucks exercise. That it sounds like there's more meat on that bone, because how many minutes in a row can you say Norm sucks? And then you're out of material. And it sounds like there's a lot of other good material in it. Don't forget, Ben Goessling will join at the bottom of the hour.
If you want to chime in what's happening to your favorite KFAN shows, you can make your voice heard on the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line. Just let us know what you have to say by texting that message to 64686. That is 64686. Standard text message and data rate supply.
The Netflix fight is scheduled for tonight, right? Which we discussed briefly yesterday. Mike Tyson, who's he fighting? Who's the 20?
Jake Paul.
Jake Paul. You'll watch tonight, won't you? Or no? You have Netflix? I assume you have Netflix.
We'll see.
Not sure. You're not sure you're going to take the bait?
Yeah, I feel it would be like a guilty pleasure watch. Like, I wouldn't really feel comfortable about it.
I think the advantage of it being on Netflix is if you're a subscriber already, you say, well, I haven't. It's not like I spent an extra $20 or I spent an extra money. I already have it, so I'll take a look at it, and then, if I'm bored with it quickly. The most annoying aspect of it, maybe predictable too, was the alleged near fight yesterday at the weigh-in. I mean, how hard do you have? I mean, I get the bit, I do, but that told me there must be some concern about people watching, how many of them are going to watch, and whether the folks who put this thing together are worried that it's going to be a farce. So you say, okay, how can we'll do the weigh-in shoving match again, and we'll have the young guy say he's going to kill him. It's like, okay, I see. That's never been done before.
Well, also in boxing too, because I was all in on, I think it was McGregor and Floyd. I was like, I can't wait to watch this.
Yes.
And it was a complete dud. Yeah, it sucked.
You're right.
That's true. Then I've realized, like, most of these big-time dream, I mean, I wouldn't call this a dream, but these big-time boxing matches end up being just duds that go the whole length anyways, and nothing happens.
That's it. Oh, very well. Yeah. That's likely to be. I guess then you go into a different mode, and you say, I'm just going to ambulance chase tonight. I'm gonna get in on the farce so I can mock it. But it's a Friday night. It's going to take how many minutes, and I'll then move on, figure out something else that might be more instructive and more nourishing from a viewing standpoint. A couple quick texts regarding our conversation with Sean Skinner about the new North Stars documentary available via Fox 9. Chuck next to Hazel is an old friend of the program. Dan, why is Louis still kissing Norm Green's ass? Well, I got to save that one for Louis. By the way, I love Louis, and I hope he's on your show for the next 20 years, and I am excited to watch the North Stars documentary. 612 guy, when the North Stars moved, that's when I realized professional sports truly are a business. Yeah, it's a cliche that we hear every day, but that's what brings it home. I think in any city that has lost, or metro area that's lost a team, that's what makes it more than a cliche, for sure. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Dan, what might be interesting to those not familiar with the North Stars is the fact that they were part of the class of 67 in the NHL. The next 6 teams to join the original 6, even 12 teams in a professional league, seems improbable. I remember it like yesterday, man. I grew up, a Blackhawks fan in Chicago because pro basketball came to the end to Chicago in 67. I think 67, 68, if I'm not mistaken. So I was hockey guy, actually, pro before basketball, and it was remarkable to think because you get expansion all the time. But when you bring 6 teams in all at once, that did make it very exciting. You double the size of the enterprise, which was impressive. Saul and Blaine, I was a huge Stars fan growing up. I've warmed to the Wild, but never liked like I did the Stars. That gap between pro hockey teams may be a bigger Gopher fan of any pro hockey team in Minnesota. I honestly think if there was a way Minnesota could have kept the North Star logo as their own, a lot more people would be bigger fans of the pro squad. I'm conflicted on this issue because Saul may be right, but I reached a point where I thought I've come to think over the years that there's been way too much obsession over let's get a uniform that looks like the Stars uniform now. At some point, now if in the beginning that could have been part of the deal where you say, guess what? For whatever reason, you get to keep the logo here and the name here, but that didn't happen. And so at some point, to me, it becomes, you got to let it go because I don't think there's any reason to think that's going to change now. And then to do these manufactured things where we'll do this kind of giveaway or this kind of looks like, it says Wild on it, but kind of looks like the Stars, which if I were a North Stars fan would actually bug me more because all it does is it brings the old wounds back into the open. They're still not coming back here. The North Stars are not coming back, correct? And you now have, a fairly legitimate hockey enterprise for the people who are much of a different age. It's never going to be the same because the teams you grow up with are always the ones with which you have the greatest emotional attachment.
And I get that too. And then we even have the alternates now, which damn near half the home games they're wearing the North Stars colors. So, which I'm not crazy about. But I was born in 96, so I wasn't even alive when they moved. Barely was alive when the Wild came back, essentially. But to me, as someone who has no nostalgia whatsoever, I just don't. The Wild, to me, came here out of love for Minnesota, right? And the love for the state of hockey. That was kind of their bit. But then people still are kind of, even like Saul said, it's just never been the same.
Yeah.
Like it feels to me like you're still trying to go after your ex-wife that kind of cheated on you and slashed your tires.
It basically
what I mean?
Has given you the back of her hand. Yeah, is not interested in you anymore.
And your new wife is great.
Is pretty good. Well, at least so far this year.
Yeah. So anyways, that's kind of how I feel. But I wasn't alive. I don't understand it, so I can't throw stones.
Some of it is just generational. Yeah, there's no question. 612 guy, Dan, why did you beat around the bush and not mention that you're in the damn documentary? I thought I did. Yeah, I don't know how much I'm in it. I was glad to help. I know they had a lot of people including Luigi from back then, a lot of old North, I think several old North Stars. I think Madonna's in there among others. But yeah, I was happy to do it. We taped some stuff not that far from here, actually. I want to say it was months and months and months ago. So they've worked hard on this, and they took more than 15 minutes to put together. So for the folks who are saying they enjoyed it, I'm not surprised that it is indeed well done. We've got a lot of football to get to. Ben Goessling, if you got questions or comments for him, Bradshaw and Brian KFAN text line is the best way to reach us. That's 64686.
Time now for the Vikings Report on the Fan, presented by Miller Lite. Vikings safety Cam Bynum joins Barreiro next after this from Miller Lite.
Standard Heating and Air Conditioning, fine sponsor of our next segment, Weekly, with Ben Goessling, who covers the Vikings in the National Football League for the Star Tribune and StarTribune.com. I'm assuming, Goessling, I haven't checked this, I'm assuming you are now also on Blue Sky. Are you part of the... I guess you could say the move to Blue Sky, or are you more of, I'm going to cover my bases here. I'm not going to leave Twitter exactly, but I'm seeing a little bit of Blue Sky momentum, not to be confused with, what was the one before that? Threads was supposed to have momentum for a while, and then it died, and then, I don't know if it's died, but I don't think it's gotten huge. Are you part of the Blue Sky movement?
I am. I will say this. I am basically anywhere that anybody is moving. I still am on Twitter.
Yeah,
I'm
makes
still
sense.
on I'm on Threads and I'm on Blue Sky, and I've basically found a way so that if whatever site you want, if
you're there, well,
you find my Vikings info useful, I can get it to you any way possible. So I am in all of those places. And the nice thing about having a weird last name is it's not hard to get the same username everywhere. So it's just Ben Goessling on all of those places.
Yeah,
so,
that's a good point.
Yes, I am on all of them.
Yeah, I figured anybody who's in the business that you're in makes sense to say, you want to be available to anybody who wants to be interested on any of these sites, right? That's the whole idea. Exposure is what the whole thing is about. Speaking of exposure, was it your nugget that maybe, I don't want to tease people too much, but the Vikings December 1 game against the Cardinals, who's to say that could end up being a flexed game into Monday Night Football? Is that true?
Yes, it is. It's certainly a possibility that it's going to happen. I don't know that we will hear that for sure until next week, but it is something that, as I understand it, is a decent possibility that could happen. It's Broncos right now, and I think even Troy Aikman said a couple weeks ago in an interview, they're talking about flexing out of that game. And you look at the slate, and that's the weekend after Thanksgiving, so there's the Thanksgiving games that are fixed, and then there's Eagles-Ravens on Sunday afternoon, but that's like, I think CBS has the doubleheader, and the whole country is getting that game. There is no other 325 game that week. So there aren't a ton of options to move into that Monday night spot, and I think the Vikings and Cardinals game, and then I think it's Chargers and the Falcons is the only other game of like two teams that are even competitive. So I think there's a decent chance it happens. It would mean 2 Monday night games in 3 weeks, which is weird, but there's a chance that gets moved to Monday night for the flex scheduling.
Yeah, I mean, because I got to say, Arizona is a team worth paying attention to now. There's no question. The QB, when I've seen, and I got to see a decent amount of what they did to the Bears, and I've seen parts of a couple other games, and what impresses me is that it looks to me, and I don't know if this is a big angle on him, maybe I haven't watched enough, is he's become more content with just making the right play rather than I got to scramble around from one side to the other and then throw the ball 50 yards downfield. He's taking checkdowns. He's throwing 9 yards here. He's running more judiciously. That's what I see with Arizona, that they might be a little bit more dangerous because I don't know how much he's studying, because I know that's always been a big subject there. But it looks like he's either studying more or he's just getting better advice on don't act like you have to be the hero on every play.
Yeah, I think that is true. And if he's still doing that when the new Call of Duty game is out, I mean, that's certainly an improvement as well. That was always the one that would take him down is when that came out. And I think that just came out a week ago. But yeah, he is, I think, starting to rein it in a little bit, which makes sense for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's just a better way to run your offense in the NFL. You're not going to be able to survive when the defensive linemen and the edge rushers are as good as they are. You're going to get yourself hurt. And I also think as you get older, and he's not an old guy by any means yet. I think he's probably 26, 27, but you can't play that way when you're 36. You are going to have to alter what you do. And you even see, I think Aaron Rodgers has noticed this over the course of his career. Not that he was even quite as dynamic as Kyler Murray, but you can't run away from everybody your entire career in the NFL. So I think learning to do that as a resource that's available, but not as your first way of playing is a better way to operate. And it just takes you out of that mode where everything becomes a scramble drill and your receivers have to be on the same page as well. I mean, that can work because he's athletic as all get out and you have receivers that learn to play along with him, but I don't think that's the way any offense wants to live the whole time. And I think part of the reason they've gotten better is from some of that structure that's come into it. With Drew Petzing, their offensive coordinator, the former Vikings assistant coach, who was very well regarded here. So all of that does seem to have them in a much better spot and much more competitive in that division. And maybe we'll end up seeing them on prime time in a couple of weeks.
Let's connect this in a sense, I think, to the Vikings. There's a quote from the head coach, I think it was with PA, that's been getting some attention that certainly got my attention because it's something I've been kind of running into the ground, quite frankly, for the last year and change. And it was a couple comments from KOC, including this one. There's a layer sometimes where in my mind I'm trying to have some growth as the head coach and not just the play caller, not just the egomaniac of wanting to score points and constantly show everybody how smart we are. And it's apropos, it's germane because, for the obvious reasons, this team's one, the offense's one difficulty, especially lately, has been turning the ball over. So do you think he's referring to then trying to, be less concerned in lobbying with Darnold about, got to get the ball downfield, got to get the ball to JJ every play? Or is he talking as much about, I got to continue to integrate more and more the running game than even I have to this point and worry less and less about the fancy stats? What did you take out of that comment?
I think there's some of both in it. I think there has certainly been a change with the way they've gone about it with Darnold being in there. You're just not with a quarterback that's been in your system for as long as Kirk Cousins was. I think they're very aware of the fact that Darnold is here in a system that was not developed with him in mind. I mean, that was when Kirk Cousins comes in on the ground floor, you can sit down with him and say, okay, what do you like? What do you not like? And we're going to build a playbook around that. Whereas Sam Darnold is inheriting a lot of this. So I think he has understood that that's going to mean certain things don't work the way they always have. And no matter how much you want them to do that, it's just going to have to be a little bit different. And I think there's also this can't fight City Hall element of it, especially when teams are covering Justin Jefferson the way that they are. I mean, he talked about it. No matter how much we want them to change, they're not changing. So you can't just take those throws and beat your head into a wall and hope that Justin Jefferson comes down with one, because some of those are going to end up being interceptions, or some of them are going to end up being incompletions that kill a drive, or whatever it would happen to be. So I think there's some of that involved, but it also, and I think we talked about this last week, but this growth that he's had as a play caller, he's hit on this a couple of times, where it's understanding that just because I draw it up and I love the way it looks on a board and think this is going to kill somebody when we get into a game, this is going to crush a defense, it doesn't always go that way, or you can't take that chance in the moment that you're in. So I think there's just a little more of an understanding of how this stuff works in the context of a game, how long sustained drives, what impact that has on a defense, what impact that has on an opposing offense when they can't get to all the stuff they want to do. I think there's just some realization, some introspection that has come into it that he is learning from his own tendencies as a coach and learning to change those in a way that's to the benefit of the team. I think a lot of that's what he's talking about as well. Connected question
that came from the audience earlier, maybe anticipating this discussion. This is from Elijah out of the 507 area code, to you. Despite our record, if indeed J.J. McCarthy were healthy, do you think with the amount of turnovers from Darnold, we would have seen a switch at quarterback? Second of all, is there any reason to be concerned with J.J. having that second procedure? Good. Both of them are good questions I was going to get to, but fire away.
Yeah, I think, and I've had a number of people ask me some variation of the McCarthy-Darnold question. I think if the season plays out exactly the same way as it has, and they're 7-2, and these things are not necessarily costing them games, no, I don't think anything would have changed. I think Darnold would still be the starting quarterback. I think the thing that would be different is there'd probably be more questions from people like Seifert and myself about, are you going to keep Sam Darnold as your starting quarterback in that setting? But I do think this was always going to be about when they felt J.J. McCarthy was ready, not necessarily when he was their best option on that given day. It was more about, the analogy I've used is like a pitcher in baseball. When are you ready to send him up to the majors and not have to worry about sending him back down? When are you ready for J.J. McCarthy to take that job and not give it back? So I think it was always going to be more about that. And I think they felt optimistic about where he was in the preseason, and maybe he would have continued to force that issue just by how good he had looked. But no, if they were still 7-2 and he was here, I still think Darnold is the starting quarterback, even with these turnovers the last couple of weeks. As for the second procedure with his knee, I don't think there's anything terribly major to worry about there. I mean, the injection that he got has been something you see a lot of people get. I think Sam Bradford used to do it when he had knee issues, and Matt Khalil. And those are guys that had probably more chronic knee issues than this. But that, I think, is a pretty common remedy for swelling after a surgery. And I think a lot of it there is they're saying, let's get ahead of every element of this that we can. I mean, and you see them do that a lot. I think the level of precaution, the way they operate is pretty high. And I think that's kind of where this wound up. I don't think it's anything terribly major to worry about. I know a lot of people say, oh, a Vikings quarterback in a knee, we've been down that road before. This could be a big concern. I don't think this is that, at least as far as I understand it at this point.
I don't sense from your prediction via StarTribune.com and other analysis that you've laid out that you think this is going to be a nail-biter, perhaps to the degree that it was in Jacksonville. But I do have to ask you, and I guess I was unaware of this. So if I have this information right, the Tennessee defense ranks number 1 in the league in yards allowed, but it's 4th worst in points allowed. Is that accurate? And if it is, how does one explain that disparity? Is that all about like a bunch of turnovers, so they're constantly put in bad position by an error-prone offense? It seems odd.
Yeah, it is a weird stat. It is something like that. It's either second or it's something in points allowed. It's in that range where it's like they're way at the top on fewest points allowed, or fewest yards allowed, I should say, but way at the bottom in points allowed. And they have turned the ball over a lot. They're like, I think, 17 turnovers for the year. I think they're minus 11 in the take-give margin. So a lot of it has been short fields. It's throwing interceptions. They give up a lot of sacks. I mean, they've given up, I think, 26 sacks or so for the year already. Will Levis has been sacked on like 10 or 11% of his dropbacks. So they have done a lot of things to make things very difficult on their defense. They have some players on that defense. I mean, when they were here for joint practices last year, Jeffrey Simmons was really disruptive. They'll have him. They have a couple other guys on that front. They won't have L'Jarius Sneed, the corner that we've seen in the past with Kansas City. He's out for Sunday, but they do have some guys that will help them defensively. It's been a lot of it where they just put themselves in really bad positions because of the turnovers and the sacks that change the field position as well. I think the defense will make things a little more difficult. I think you're going to see a lot of the shell coverage. You're going to see some blitzes. There'll be some things that try to keep the Vikings from taking things off to the races with their offense. But I just don't think this offense, this Titans offense with Will Levis behind an offensive line that's not very good and is beat up, I just think they're going to have a really hard time with Brian Flores and all of the things he's going to throw at them. Tony Pollard, the running back we've seen in Dallas, he's good. You know, he can make some plays, but I just think Levis trying to beat this team is going to be hard to imagine that happening unless the Vikings do some things to stake him to an early lead or something like that. So a lot of the reason I have the Vikings winning this one comfortably, and they should have won probably last week comfortably as well without the turnovers, but I think this one especially, maybe even more so than last week, that offense is just not very well set up to handle the Vikings defense. So that's why I have them winning pretty easily.
Right tackle Leroy Watson, I think, has also been ruled out, correct? And in addition to L'Jarius Sneed. So not a very good team with not a lot of margin for error, with some more significant injury losses, certainly, than what the Vikings are facing. The Levis Mason Rudolph stat, I noted, Rudolph being their other quarterback, 11 touchdown passes and 14 turnovers between them. Now, I think Levis has actually done a better job. I don't think he has any fumbles this year, which he's been a fumble guy before, but Rudolph had a few. And so, as you mentioned, their their turnover ratio is not very good at all. I have heard some people also surmise that they think that this is the game that Aaron Jones might carry the ball 45 times. Now, I'm exaggerating a little, but is this shaping up that way as well? Is that another bit of the perhaps subtle code offered up by the head coach when it comes to, kind of mixing it up a little bit?
Yeah, maybe he finally heard you talk about it enough and you finally got through. Maybe that was what did it.
Well, I'll take any credit I can, anybody's willing to give me. It took a while, it seems like, but then again, he could say, well, I didn't have Aaron Jones before. So, I didn't really have much of a running game last year. So even if I'd wanted to do what you asked me to do, he was not going to feel very comfortable doing it. But as we say, it's not really just the running. It's last week. If you got to throw the ball to Hockenson 20 times instead of 10, do it. Don't be afraid to do that. Again, ultimately, you got to get your big weapons involved, right? But within a given game or a stretch of game, it sounds so trite, but I really do like the opinion that keep going to something until they stop it, and then and don't be afraid to repeat it. And then once they stop it, then okay, all right, it's time to try something else.
Yeah, I think that I do think there is part of that there. I mean, what he's talked about with getting the tight ends involved, that all came as a result of Jefferson. Being able to run the ball is because they're seeing all of these light boxes where everybody's saying, let's keep the safeties back, let's keep the top over the defense. And they're saying, fine, we will run it. We will have the ball for 42 minutes. We will run all of these double-digit play drives, and then it's on you and your young quarterback to try to solve our defense when they're playing from behind. Now they have to be better in the red zone. They have to be better in short yardage situations running the ball. I think those things are still works in progress, but there is, on a philosophical level, I think there's a realization that no matter how much I might want to do it a certain way, there are just going to be times where that can't happen because defenses don't allow that. So I do think to that extent, when you're going to see the Titans play the way that they do, where they're going to keep safeties back, they're going to try to take Jefferson away, a lot of the stuff that we've seen, I think they will try to run the ball. I think they will try to throw underneath to the tight ends. It's a similar recipe probably to what we saw last week. And it is that thing of, okay, if you want to play that way, that's fine. But we are going to force you out of it, or we're going to take everything that we can when you are giving us this. So I think there's just a greater realization of where all of that stuff is going to come from and what you have to do to counter it. So, yes, I think it's a game where Jones is much more active again. I think they will continue to run the ball quite a bit, and it's also a help for Darnold in those situations. So, yes, I think the idea that this could be a big Aaron Jones game is correct.
Speaking of flexing, any chance don't we have Atlanta in here on December 8th?
Yes.
Any chance is that one could be juicy too, or are there too many other good games that week?
I haven't looked at the slate that week to see if there's an obvious place for that one to go. I mean, if the subplots are there, both these teams are in playoff position and Cousins coming back home, that makes some sense. I just haven't looked at the rest of it to know, but I'm sure Vikings fans are saying, can't we move that one to Monday night so you get Monday Night Kirk? And I think I would say to that, be careful.
Yeah.
Monday Night Kirk's been a lot better lately than we remember him being for a lot of his time here and even before that. So, yeah, I got to look at the schedule there, but you're right. I mean, there is enough intrigue to that one that it's certainly a possibility that one gets moved to. I have a feeling all of my noon starts that I was excited about when the schedule came out, a few of those are probably going to go away, and I have to burn the midnight oil probably a little more often than I was expecting to do.
Standard Heating and Air Conditioning helps bring Ben Goessling to the audience. They are our fine sponsor each and every Friday. Pleasant travels, safe travels to Nashville, Tennessee, and we will chat next week.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Ben. Ben Goessling, fine work on a number of fronts. As always, Lavelli Neal III is part of the 5 o'clock hour, but the top 5 at 5 is coming up to include.
We've got a Vikings injury report to talk about and a Minnesota Wild win to recap.